Chapter 35. Fear gripped Vittoria the moment Esperanza swung her sword. Mateo easily blocked her strike and danced to the right, Benot's longer sword tight in his right hand. Esperanza advanced again, but Mateo staved her off. Despite all those years in the catacombs, she'd clearly prepared for this day. Vittoria's heart ached for him, but swelled with pride for the way he held himself together. Today, Mateo would lose his entire family in one fell swoop. "Will he win?" Sonara whispered. She stared at Mateo, at the crowd, at the sky, at anything but Romeo's body on the sand. Tears trickled down her cheeks, as if acknowledging his death would break something inside her. "He must," Vittoria replied, grateful for Sonara at her side, grateful for the knowledge that Anico was safe with mare and pair. Esperanza pressed a chance to gain the offensive upper hand, but Mateo's defense came too quickly, and he pushed the advantage he had in size. Although she danced out of his way with smooth footwork, he took up more room than she did. His arm reached longer. She ducked out of the way with a grunt more than once. When Mateo slashed at her neck, she slipped back. Her balance off, she dropped a hand to the sand and caught herself. Taking advantage of her open chest, Mateo swiped. She caught his blade with hers and tossed a handful of sand. He recoiled with a shout, sand in his eyes. With a hiss, Esperanza lunged for his thigh, but he knocked her away. Vittoria shuddered when a slash of red appeared on Mateo's arm, but he didn't seem to notice. Esperanza tried to hide it, but she'd already begun to tire. Mateo spun and kicked up sand, but Esperanza blocked it with a spell and sent it back at him. Mateo seemed to test her, swinging high, then low, as if he didn't really mean to hit her. Neither of them spoke. No one in the crowd made a sound. Esperanza moved fast, her breaths coming in quick pants, until Mateo closed the distance. She tried to shove her sword into his ribs, but he anticipated her. Then he barreled at her like a ship. There was no hesitation in his face, no fear in his eyes, no concern in the way he handled the sword as if it were an extension of himself. Sweat beaded on Esperanza's brow as she blocked his advances, but her feet tangled in her dress. The sand gave out beneath her feet, and she fell. Mateo leaped and cracked the edge of her sword, slicing her wrist. She cried out, blood spurting from the injury. Her blade fell to the sand. Mateo kicked it away. "For Romeo," he hissed. His sword plunged into her chest. Esperanza's body jerked with the sudden, violent thrust. She gasped, eyes wide as the force pulled her up and then dropped her back. Wordlessly, her lips moved. She kept her gaze on Mateo, lips twisted in pain. "You destroyed my brother," he whispered, tears in his eyes. "Now I have destroyed you. You will not exist in the annals of history. No one will remember your name. The Castaneda line will continue, and I will right the wrongs you and Pear have brought upon us. Let that be your dying awareness. I will never be like you, and that is the legacy I will always carry. That is the promise I make. May honor obliterate you." The pale light of dawn caressed her startled expression. Her eyes flittered to Romeo before she choked on her own blood. A crimson stain tinged her lips as her breath sputtered, then died away in a drawn-out sigh. Her muscles slackened. For a long, long pause, Mateo stood there. Vittoria wanted to reach out to him, to remind him that he wasn't alone, that he wasn't his mare or his pair, that he was the High Priest, and he had earned it. But she didn't. She remained quiet while he regarded his mare, truly dead before his eyes this time, as if for the first time. There would be months of trying to understand what he had discovered today, years of putting the pieces together, years of mourning the family he should have had, of regret for the atrocious things they had done. But perhaps there was one thing he'd never question, that he was the one meant to do this. Seconds later, Mateo yanked his sword free. A sucking sound came from Esperanza's chest as blood bubbled onto the sand. He stood over her with a snarl, dripping sword held in front of him. When no one else advanced, he stuck his sword in the sand. The sun rose overhead, ascending above the shimmering ocean. In the distance, another reverberating crash sounded. A slight tremor shuddered the sand at Vittoria's feet. She stepped forward until she stood in front of him. His body trembled. He stared at the sand. "Mateo." She put her trembling hands over his cheeks. Tears thickened her throat. "Look at me." He blinked, absently putting a hand over hers. When their eyes met, she saw shock, pain, a glazed sort of disbelief. "You did it," she whispered. "You are the High Priest. The civil war is quelled. At least so far. You have given us a chance to redeem the mistakes of the past, and a reason to unite. You are the goodness from a broken family, and you are made to lead. The time to step up is now." "No, Mazuna," he whispered, his fingers tightening around hers. "We have done it." Mateo gathered Vittoria into his arms and held her close. She ignored all the eyes staring at them, the unbroken tension ready to ignite. Instead, she lost herself in the feeling of her heart pounding against his. He was alive. Mateo gripped Vittoria for a moment longer, as if he could physically draw strength from her. Then he slowly released her, but kept their hands tangled together. He moved in a slow circle to face all the witches around them. "I am Mateo," he called. Magic carried his voice over the crowd with a slight echo. "Mateo, Mateo, Mateo. I am the High Priest of the Eastern Network, and I will command your allegiance. If you don't wish to give it, that is your choice. You may leave for the wilds of the North. We will have an escort for you. My first order of business is to get everyone off this peninsula and somewhere safe." Another rumble sounded from Nechi, and dust billowed upward. Vittoria felt a surge of pride and love. There was still tension in the air. Landowners warily eyed snarling workers. The hostility would run deep for a long time. Decades of servitude and oppression could not be rectified overnight, nor by a single leader. But Mateo seemed to instinctively sense that all witches in the Eastern Network had to know he was here for them. "My second order of business will be to establish a new council to make a plan to move forward into a new life. A better life. A fair life. Where everyone is heard no matter their status, and we all have a chance. Is there anyone who wants to challenge me?" A territorial growl had replaced his usual diplomacy. Blood and bruises stained him, and he looked as haggard as the rest of them. The unusual appearance gave him a wild look, befitting a leader who had been through so much. Silence hovered over the crowd in response. Of course, witches would challenge him, Vittoria imagined. Give the landowners a few days to process the enormity of what had happened, all the guardians turning to murder them, for one, and they would be spitting mad. An unbearable number of problems were going to pour into Mateo's laps for months and years. Workers would rightly want compensation and restitution. All witches would want an idea of what all this meant. Mateo wouldn't be able to do everything for everyone, but at least he was willing to start. Right then, all Mateo needed was a chance to unveil his plan without a civil war breaking out, without the terror of the night reaching a new fever pitch in the light of day and exploding like the powder that had nearly destroyed Magnolia Castle. Another crash and rumble came from behind them. The ground shivered. "It's time to clear the peninsula," he called. "The catacombs are collapsing underneath Nechi as we speak, and no one is safe here. If you can transport, do so now. Those of you who can't, remain. I will find someone to transport you to safety." The ground shook, but no one disappeared. Instead, all Nechi's witches seemed to hold their breaths. Then the crowd parted behind Mateo, and Vittoria gasped. A few exclamations came from Mateo's right, and he whirled around, Vittoria still in hand. Weary, bloodied Balta, with his missing tooth and scorched hair, stumbled toward them through the sand. Once he stood a few paces away, he dropped to one knee. Tears brimmed in his eyes. "To my High Priest and High Priestess." He put a hand over his left shoulder and bowed his head. "I pledge my life." A ripple moved through the crowd. Vittoria whirled around, tucked close to Mateo's side, as workers began to kneel behind her. First Banat and his men and the workers behind them. A wave of rebels fell to their knees next, hands over their left shoulders. The movement spread outward until everyone, landowners, workers, and rebels, paid homage to their new leaders, even if some tight expressions hinted at reluctance. Mateo's grip on Vittoria tightened, and she felt glad for the extra support. Relief made her dizzy, her thoughts blunted in the aftermath of so much fear and violence. What must Mateo feel like in comparison? She squeezed his hand. "This has been a difficult and bloody night," Mateo continued. "But as it always does, daylight has come. I am the leader you need. I have prepared for this. I have plans for peace and safety, plans to forge our new path. We will hear all witches. We will unite as one network. Together, we can right wrongs and forge a new path forward. We will unite from within and create a new and better world." Witches took up the cry, chanting, "Together, together." Waves crashed on the shore, washing away the blood in sheets of pink foam. Beams of sunlight burst overhead, banishing the gray clouds to the distant horizon. Vittoria tilted her head back to look deep into Mateo's weary but exultant eyes. "Together," she whispered.